Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to another video. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name's Melissa. Around here you're going to find a lot of different beauty content. And I also wanted to mention that I do upload every single day on Instagram and Reddit, so if you're looking for some more beauty content, go check there because I upload every single day. But for today's video, we're going to deep dive into an eyeshadow palette. I love these videos and I get excited to film them every single week because eyeshadow palettes are some of my very favorite parts of makeup. And I have a super exciting palette for this week. So here's what we're going to be working with today. This palette is from Blend Buddy Cosmetics and it's called the All Done Up palette. And here's what the color story looks like on the inside. When I look at this, I get really excited. I really love colorful rainbow palettes, but I love a neutral palette and this is my type of neutral palette. This past week has also been my first ever experience with Blend Buddy, and I sit here wondering why I have waited so long. I definitely can't wait to tell you more about my thoughts on this, so if you're interested in hearing more about my personal experience, my in-depth thoughts, and my opinion about this, then stay tuned to part 2 of this video where we're going to deep dive into it and I'll give you the in-depth review. But of course, the first part of this video is going to feature a tutorial using this color story, so if you're curious about how to create a look using these shades, I'm going to show you how to do that. The look that we're going to be creating today with this is called a 4-layer halo. I think this look does a great job of representing exactly what this color story can do, and I think it turns out really cool. So guys, if you're curious on how to create a look with this palette, then let's get right on into the tutorial. Alright guys, I pulled the camera a little closer so you can get a good picture of what I'm going to be doing on my eye, and we're ready to get on into this eyeshadow look. Like I said, we're going to be creating a 4-layer halo look today, and this is going to be the second time I'm going to be creating this, so hopefully it'll go a lot better than the first time I ever did it. So you know I always like to go ahead and start with my eye prime and prep steps. But over the past week as I've been using this palette, I figured out that you don't need to go in and prime and prep your eye. It works completely fine on a bare eye. When I did looks on my completely prepped eye that I took a long time setting up, and when I did looks on a bare eye, they turned out and blended the exact same. So I'm not going to go ahead and do anything to my eye, we're just going to use it on a bare eye today. So you know how I always like to go in with really small detail brushes? I'm going to go in with something completely opposite today. We're going to take a very large fluffy blending brush. This one in specific is from Profusion. They have some really bomb brushes if you're ever looking for some affordable options. And this one in specific is called the Pointed Crease Eyeshadow ES3. And of course, if you're ever curious about any things or tools that I'm using, I always have everything linked down below, so there's no guesswork involved. So on this brush, I'm going to go in with my base layer shade called Natural. And the good thing about this look that we're going to be doing today is you can custom curate it to match your specific skin tone. So I grabbed that shade and I really got it in the bristles of my brush, and I tapped off my brush because there's a lot of fallout with this palette. And what I'm going to do is just run this all over my upper eyelid area. This is going to serve as our base layer for the other 3 layers that are going to follow suit. I do bring this into the inner corner a little bit, kind of fluff it above the crease, and I do like to bring it all the way out to where my eyebrow ends. And I do go between little back and forth swiping motions and circular motions. I don't have any specific technique for this, I'm just kind of fluffing the shade all over the eye. I know this is kind of a weird look because I usually start from darkest shade and then go to my lightest, but we're doing something completely different today. And I just think it's a little fun to switch things up, so bear with me here. Okay, so once I got that shade all completely on and it looks kind of like this, I'm ready to go in with my next layer. So for the next shade, I'm taking that same brush and I'm going into the shade called Unexpected. And again, I'm fully saturating the bristles because I want a lot of that color on my brush. And now the first shade was very easy to apply, but now for these next layers, you gotta be a bit more mindful because we wanna apply this, but we want some of that gray that we put on first to show through the edge. So I'm taking this yellow shade and I'm just gonna apply it in the same position, but a little bit lower from the top edge. Just so we can still see some of that gray, but the yellow still makes its presence. And again, I'm bringing this into the inner corner of my eye. For all 4 shades that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be bringing it into the inner corner. Now for the next 2 shades, we're going to be working more towards the crease, so I'm going to go in with a smaller Profusion brush. This is still technically a blending brush, but this is called the Small Pointed Eyeshadow ES6. So on that brush, I'm going to go into the warm brown shade called Pouty. And with this shade, I'm putting it into my crease line and following that crease all around my eye. As you can see, I'm really building up the color in my crease. I'm not blending it out quite yet. I'm just building up the color. So once I actually deposit the color, I'm gonna take my towel and wipe my brush off of all the pigment. So for all intents and purposes, my brush is pretty clean now. I'm gonna go back in and blend the shade out. And remember, you still want a little bit of that yellow peeking through, so you don't want to cover up everything that we already did. And for the last layer, I'm taking that same brush and going into the cool dark brown called Doe-Eyed. And this is going to be our halo shade. So I'm going to start building this up in the outer and inner corner of my eye. And I'm just putting this on my lid and bringing it to my crease. I'm not blending it above my crease at all. So I'm starting with my outer corner first and just kind of depositing the color before I blend. And since I kind of have hooded, wrinkly eyes, I kind of do my eyes in different angles so that way I get into all the nooks and crannies so I don't miss any spots. Once I'm satisfied with how the outer portion looks, I'm going to go ahead and do the inner portion before I blend both of them out. The inner portion can be a little bit tricky in my opinion, so you want to make sure you get it on the lid and you don't go too heavily onto the crease area. But the point of doing this is you really want these two sections to be extremely dark so we have some definition there. And then lastly, since this is a halo eye, we're going to want to connect these two sections in the crease. So once again, I'm taking that same brush that I just used and wiping all the pigment off of it. And I'm gonna go ahead and blend out all these harsh edges that we have. And let me tell you, with this palette, it is not a chore at all. Now it's time to apply our lid color, and for that I'm just taking one of my little eBay detail brushes. There's so many pretty metallics in this palette that I really couldn't decide what color I wanted to use, so I figured I would do a mixture between warm and cool tone. And I'm taking this brush and I'm going to use it dry for this, and I'm going to dip into the silver and the gold called Centerfold. So I'm just mixing both of those dry onto my brush, and then once I figure I have enough on here, I'm going to take it and start stamping it onto the center bare area of my eyelid. And for my opinion, for a halo eye, you don't want to bring the sparkle up over that center halo portion. You want to keep it just on your lid. So I just continue building and building until I get somewhat of an opaque sparkly look here. And then I take this brush and just run it along the edges a little bit of that center portion just to diffuse them so it doesn't look so placed and forced. Moving on to the waterline, for this look I thought it was fine just to use a simple black pencil. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do a quick layer of that. And then for the lower lash line, I'm taking that little detail brush and I'm going back into that cool brown that we made the halo with. And I'm gonna put this on my inner and outer portion of the lower lash line now. We're gonna end up blending this out with something, so you don't wanna bring this too low, but you do wanna make it visible. And I really just like the look of some blurred edges, so to blend the edges of that black, I just dipped into the shade Unexpected and Pouty mixed together. And what I did is I just ran that along the bottom edge of that black just to give it a little extra intensity. And we can't complete a halo eye without putting some sparkle in the center of the lower lash line. So I'm still hanging on to this eBay brush and I'm going back into that silver and gold metallic shade, mixing those together on the tip of my brush. And I find this part kind of tricky because you have to maneuver underneath your lashes. So you just want to take your time and stamp this into the bare center of your lower lash line. Try your best to kind of line it up to where your top eyelid has all the sparkle. And before we continue on with this video, I do want to point out all this fallout we have, and this is the type of fallout that does not wipe away easily with a brush, so I do want to make it clear that it is best to do your eyes before your base with this palette. I'm going to go ahead and throw some quick mascara on. I'm still on that MAC Magic Extension Mascara. Like I said before, this is definitely not my favorite mascara, I'm almost through with the month and I'll be giving you all my reviews on my monthly makeup routine. If you've never watched that video before, essentially I pick out a bunch of makeup earlier in the month and I use that makeup religiously throughout the entire month. And at the end of the month, I always come back and let you know how I feel about it and if I'm going to keep it in my collection or if I'm going to declutter it or, you know, what's going to happen with all the stuff. And I got some real products to talk about this month for sure. This is yet another look that if you're a person that loves to wear false eyelashes, your eyes will really pop if you apply some false lashes with this look because the metallics are just so beautiful, and I think if you use lashes, it'll really stand out with them. Alright guys, so here's the eye look done. I'm gonna go ahead and get off camera, complete this other eye, throw some mascara on, and I'll be back and we'll talk about how this look turned out. Alright guys, I am back. The eye look is fully finished and I have sparkly fallout all over my face, but I am totally loving it and I am okay with it. I must say, I love this eye look. I love the way it matches with my shirt today. That was a total coincidence. I didn't even know it was gonna match, so I'm loving that. One of my favorite things to do is just sit back and create some really crazy eye looks, and well, this eye look isn't really crazy, it's more practical, but I still love the way it turned out. I was kind of blazing through this look and moving kind of quickly, so if you just take your time, put some thought and effort into it, you can have an out of this world look. Like I said earlier, this past week has been the first time I ever attempted this 4-layer halo thing, so I really like this technique and it's something that I'm going to continue doing into the future because I love this turnout. So yeah, let me know what your thoughts and opinions are down in the comments, whether good or bad. I want to hear all of your feedback. And with all of that being said, let's move right on into the analysis. Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of this video, which is the in-depth review. And today we're going to be reviewing this palette right here. This is from Blend Bunny Cosmetics and it's called the All Done Up palette. We have to keep things routine around here, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the palette's packaging. If you ask me, this is just my opinion, this packaging isn't really standout, and when I look at the cover of this, it really isn't a great indicator of the color story that I would expect to find on the inside. Putting that into simpler terms, the thing is, I wouldn't buy this palette for the packaging. It has all the standard components of a decent packaging and it does what it needs to do. I will say that the exterior box contains different information that is not repeated on the palette, so if you like to keep things for reference, you might want to keep both of these. When you open this palette up, there is a nice mid-sized mirror on the inside, and this palette does fold all the way back for easy handling. And here's the color story that we're dealing with on the inside. There's 20 different shades in here, and there are some pressed pigments. Now bear in mind that pressed pigments are not FDA approved, so be mindful about using those around your eye area. And each of the shades in here do weigh 1.2 grams each, so that's just slightly above the average amount per pan. This palette is also made in China if that is of importance to you. So according to my observation, out of these 20 shades, we're getting 2 different formulas. We're getting 15 mattes and then 5 metallics. And this palette, just by looking at it, is broken up into 2 very easy to interpret segments. Up here you have all your mattes, and then down here you have your row of metallics. Of course, if you go look on the Blend Bunny website, they have names for all these different types of formulas, so if you're into that, then be sure and go look. Quickly, I'm going to throw up a picture of some swatches I took from this palette so you can see how each one of these shades swatches on my skin. Moving into our routine data check, the first thing I always like to point out is that this palette is not clarified to be a clean formula, and this brand isn't any type of conscious beauty effort. This palette is cruelty-free and it is also vegan. And then if you turn the palette around, you'll notice a little symbol right here that says 12M on it, which means it has a 12-month expiration date. So getting into our cost evaluation, if you went out and bought this palette as it is today, you're going to end up paying $36 for it. Breaking that down, that comes to $1.80 per shade. Breaking that down a bit further comes to $1.50 per gram. So either way you spin it, if you break it down cost per shade or cost per gram, in my opinion, this just breaks down to be a relatively affordable price. Now guys, let's just move right on into the most opinionated part of this video, which is my recommendation. The first few things we're going to talk about is my usage experience. Over the past week, I'm going to tell you how this applied for me. So as far as patchiness, I had absolutely no patchiness or nothing even reminiscent of patchiness while using this. The longest I wore an eye look coming out of this palette is for 5 hours straight, and during that time, I did a little mini wear test after, and I didn't notice any signs of creasing, no fading, and no signs of any shadow wear off. Now, as far as staining, I always like to look at that, especially when a palette has some pressed pigments in it. And these deeper shades were a little bit burdensome to remove, but everything came off and I didn't have any staining. Now, we all like to know how an eyeshadow formula blends, right? So let me tell you a little bit about my experience while blending it. So I tested this on both a primed and set base, and then I also tested this palette on a completely untouched bare eye. In both situations, regardless of the base, this formula blends wonderfully. I didn't have any resistance to blending, I didn't have any harsh lines, and everything performed up to my standard. So if you plan on using this palette, you don't have to go through all the hassle of priming and prepping and setting your eye area to get the maximum performance out of these shades. In this palette, you're going to notice a lot of kickback from all the shades in here, and let me tell you, especially from the metallics, you're going to have a lot of fallout. These metallics in here have loose mica particles that are very, very tiny, and they are the makeup destroying kind. And by that I mean, sometimes when you have fallout, you can take a brush and quickly swipe away any fallout. The fallout from these shades does not easily come off. So due to that quality, I highly suggest doing your eyes before your base while using this palette. So let's get into some critiques that I have about this palette. The first thing I always like to look at is a palette shade range. And when I look at this is one of the most beautifully laid out shade ranges that I have seen in a long time. You have your light shades, your mid-tone shades, your very deep shades, and then of course, like I said, you have your row of metallics. And would you just look at this, we have 5 options for depth in here, and that greatly increases the palette's versatility. Now, as far as shade redundancy, I took note of 2 instances where 4 shades look pretty similar. These 2 shades right here and these 2 shades right here look similar enough to me, and I think they would perform the same basic task on the eye that I'm not sure all 4 of them warrant a valuable space inside this palette. Of course, the shades are not identical. If you do swatch them out, you can definitely spot the slight nuances, but I just think that they're quite similar, and I would use all 4 shades in the same exact way. So as you look at this, you can see that this is definitely a matte heavy palette. This palette is 75% matte heavy. So if you love a matte heavy palette, this is definitely right up your alley. I personally love a matte heavy palette, or I love a well-balanced palette, so this definitely suits my preference. In a larger than average color story, I always like to take note of a matte black shade, and in here, not only do we have the matte black, but we have 4 other shades that are slight deviations of a black. They're so dark and multifunctional, and it really does help a palette be more universal. And as far as dud shades, as I've been using this, I didn't come across any shade that wasn't consistent within its base formula. Each shade performed up to par. Now for some quick formula highlights. Like I said, the mattes are super easy to blend on any type of base that you want to use. I love that you have a nice matte range so you can make gradient builds if you're into that. The mattes build and layer so nicely. And if you were curious about the matte formula, they're more directly pigmented. So once you get some on your brush and apply it to your eye, you're going to notice some intense pigment. That's in lieu of them being buildable. So formulas that are kind of like this can be a bit more difficult to manage and control if you don't know what's coming. Now, as for the metallics in here, they're kind of a cool formula because you can use them in full pigment or you can use them as sheer toppers. So depending on what method of application you use determines their outcome. This metallic right here has a very strong pearl to green duochrome finish. It's the only shade like that in the palette, and I find it extremely unique. And like I mentioned earlier, please be mindful of the tiny loose mica particles in this. I don't mind working with a metallic formula like that, but you might, so just be warned. Now, I also tried all the application methods with the metallics. I tried my finger, a dry brush, and a damp brush, and I got an effective application using every single method. However, if you want the most vibrant intensity and, dare I say, the least amount of fallout, try using a damp brush with them. So if you really like neutral palettes, or if this color story in particular has been calling to you, or if you just really want to try the Blend Bunny formula, I definitely recommend this palette. Of course, I have 3 reasons why I say that. Now, my first reason is that you can get the best blend out of this palette on a bare eye. So if you're a person that doesn't like to go through all the eye prime and prep steps, this palette still functions in its maximum capacity on a completely bare eye. So this specific product doesn't need any sort of coddling, and this does exactly what it says it's going to do. Now, my second reason is if you're ever stuck on this palette and you can't figure out what looks to create, there are 5 different look options that are already outlined for you. So if you go down each column, There are 4 different shades, 3 mattes and 1 metallic that you can always use together. And all 4 shades go very well together and perfectly coordinate, so you'll never go without a look. And my third reason for recommendation is that this formula in here knocked my socks off, and I'd say that it stands up to my most favorite formulas in my entire collection. I have several benchmark formulas in my collection that cannot be beat, and this formula is very much on par with those palettes. So guys, when I rated this palette for this week, I gave it an absolute A. And I must say, I had an absolute blast while using this. I loved all the looks that I created with it, and it's on par with all my benchmark palettes I have in my collection. So guys, that is all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful, and if you did, please give me a giant thumbs up, and if you didn't like it, just hit that thumbs down button. And until next time, bye!